Welcome to the RJI Futures Lab, where we help you make your organization more innovative. I'm Ruben Stern. This week, an introduction to making good podcasts. Podcasting is not a new medium, but audio storytelling is a new frontier for many traditional media outlets trying to connect with their audiences. The Futures Lab's Katie Mersman talked with podcasters at Quartz and BuzzFeed to find out how they started making podcasts that people want to hear.
Even for news outlets that don't traditionally produce audio, podcasts can be a more intimate, personal way to both tell news and engage with the audience. When Quartz partnered with Marketplace to create the podcast Actuality, host Tim Fernholz learned the basics of podcasting while also maintaining a casual, conversational tone with his business stories.
I think Marketplace was interested in doing more digital stuff, and we at Quartz were interested in doing more podcasts like everyone else, and so it seemed like a fruitful collaboration. It is relatively simple and cheap to produce a podcast. You know, you can use SoundCloud for distribution, you can get a relatively nice microphone pretty cheaply.
But a degree of simplicity doesn't override the significance of podcasts.
It's a different way of telling stories that can be a little more personal. I think there's still something unique about the human voice. And, you know, it gives us a different way to reach people, a different level of depth. We're very mobile focused at Quartz. You know, our website's optimized for that. A lot of our readers are on mobile. But when you're looking at a story online, you know, you sort of page through it. But when people listen to podcasts on their phone, they're there with you for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And that kind of engagement is something real.
And that's what today's episode is about. Trafficking in animals and animal goods.
It might be the world's fastest growing business. One example, rhino poaching for horns.
For me, it always comes down to how you would tell the story to someone in a bar. You know, if you go home at the end of the day or you go out at the end of the day and someone asks what you're working on and how you would tell it to them.
At BuzzFeed, podcasts are designed and built with a specific audience in mind, often to build a sense of community with a more diverse audience that isn't always acknowledged in podcasting.
We are mindfully going into that space with people who are not white and male because we want there to be lots and lots of different perspectives in podcasting.
Rather than striving to make huge blockbuster hit shows for existing podcast audiences, we were going to try to bring in new audiences to podcasting. And for us, that meant young people and people of color, who are two groups of people that have been just totally left out of the podcast boom and podcast content. A lot of our audience is young people of color, and we get the same messages over and over again. Thank you so much. I've never heard my voice in podcasting. I didn't even know what a podcast was. So we're definitely I think doing well on bringing in new audiences.
Hi everyone, I'm Heaven.
I'm Tracy.
And welcome to another round with Heaven and Tracy.
Quartz and BuzzFeed agree that developing community and intimacy with podcasts requires hosts who people really want to listen to. For outlets without a significant background in audio, finding hosts often means developing them and teaching them audio techniques.
All that stuff can be learned and taught, but I think having a genuine interest and excitement and enthusiasm for what you're talking about needs to be the number one seed of a show.
A good place to start for a lot of these people is to kind of look into their staff and figure out who could be an engaging podcast host. We're trying to showcase people across video, written stuff, podcasts. So we really want to focus on the great people who work at BuzzFeed basically. And we have this show, Another Round, that's been a big hit, that's hosted by two BuzzFeed staffers.
At BuzzFeed, writers with an established personality and social media presence make good hosts if they have a willingness and passion for the subject matter.
Our shows, rather than being kind of story and production driven, I think are more, they're personality talk show type things. So the shows that we're doing are just pretty fundamentally different. A lot of it is about kind of finding your voice and finding the voice that appeals to a broader audience that is already within you, and then figuring out how to get that out in the world.
For Fernholz, the move to podcasting forced him to not only focus his voice, but also to make some technical changes to his interviewing and communication style.
All of that stuff that I think is natural or obviously on the radar of radio people is stuff I'm still figuring out. Writing a script and figuring out how to sort of bring the listener along with you with different kinds of sound structures and things like that.
And when it comes to making and designing podcasts people want to listen to, Fernholz says the basics of reporting still apply.
There is no substitute for a really good guest. If someone is interesting to talk to in person, that person will probably be interesting on a podcast. So if you're a small news organization, I would start with the sources that your reporters love to call up and find some way to get them on tape talking about a story and make that your podcast.
Fernholz says his strategy when building a podcast story is to think of it as a feature piece that will last instead of an ephemeral web story. For the Futures Lab, this is Katie Mersman.
Quartz completed its first season of podcasting in January and is starting the second season this month. And that's it for this report from the RJI Futures Lab. I'm Ruben Stern. We'll see you in the future.